Let's start with this. Those deadly wildfires tearing through California's famous wine country. I'm Harris Faulkner. Let's go outnumbered overtime. Firefighters in an all-out effort now to contain those raging flames in Napa County so far. And this number is new this hour. At least 13 people have died in all of this. An estimated 1,500 homes, businesses destroyed. Unexpected high winds from Sunday into Monday morning have now turned that already bad situation into worse, catching fire officials and people who live there off guard.
I was trying to spray the backyard as much as I could, but within minutes I saw the fire coming up over the hill there, and I was like, I have to get out of here. I'll probably try and handle this the best I can for now, and then deal with it emotionally a couple months down the road. As a community, we'll probably band together and work through this. You know, that's what you do.
But I want to assure the people of California, on behalf of President Trump and our entire administration, and that we will be working very closely with Governor Brown and with California to see you through these challenging times.
Let's get a report on the ground now. Claudia Cowan is live for us in Santa Rosa, California. Claudia?
Harris, it's very hard to underestimate the extent of the damage from these wildfires, but you get some idea. Looking around neighborhoods like this one, we are in the Berry Brook community of Santa Rosa, where, as you can see, home after home has been completely obliterated by these flames. We are seeing the occasional shower stall still stands, the burned out brick walls, and check it out over here. We have a burned out shell of a car. You have to imagine that when the flames roared through this area late Sunday night, early Monday morning, people just piled in one car and fled as fast as they could. And these are the cars that are left that will help people perhaps identify where they used to live. And just beyond the wall to my right, you see the power lines are all down as well. And that is a big problem. Crews are already out and about this morning working in this area to fix downed phone lines, and to get the power restored, because until that happens, no one will be allowed back into this area. 17 large wildfires that started Sunday night continue to burn across the state. More communities continue to be evacuated today, even where there's no active fire, especially in those areas with one road in and one road out, because these winds can push the embers a quarter mile away and start new fires. So fire officials want to take every precaution. Some of these wildfires are now blending together, and officials have not yet issued any containment numbers at all, but they should make some progress today thanks to cooler winds and cooler weather.
Conditions are more favorable at this point, giving firefighters an opportunity to start to construct some line and get some containment on these fires. We have a sheer volume of so many fires in such a large area that we're really prioritizing our resources for lives and property.
Speaking of property, take a look at what this area used to look like. It was filled with single-family homes right around the $700,000 range. Take a look now. Every one of these homes is gone. As you mentioned, Harris, the death toll now stands at 13. You have to imagine that all of those victims were trapped by the flames. It's heartbreaking to think about the way those people died. And fire officials say as they comb through some of the more remote areas and do their continued damage assessments, they expect that number to rise.
Yeah, you gave us a great side-by-side with what that neighborhood used to look like. And I know from satellite images that some of that smoke is reaching as far east as the next state over, Nevada, and beyond. That is a tough situation. We'll continue to cover it. Claudia, thank you very much. Let's move on to this. Another Fox News alert on new developments now in the deadliest mass shooting in modern United States history. They are now raising questions if the carnage in the massacre could have been reduced or perhaps even prevented. Las Vegas police are now making a major change in their timeline of events. We've been playing with this now for about an hour, for several hours, trying to really understand it and getting more information in by the hour. They say Stephen Paddock shot a security guard 6 minutes before he opened fire on concert goers 32 floors below his hotel suite, not after, which was what we were originally told. Dan Springer is live for us in Vegas with the latest on this investigation. Dan, this was huge as it was breaking, and now again we're getting more details.
Yeah, because it changes our idea of how this went down. We always thought that the shooting happened, you know, the shooter going down and trying to shoot the people at the concert first, and that Jesus Campos, who was the security guard, sort of interrupted that and was fired upon. But now we know that didn't happen that way. Jesus Campos was checking out what he heard was an alarm for an open door up in the 32nd floor. When he got up there in the hallway, he heard what he thought was drilling sound. So it's very possible that he actually stopped the killer as he was continuing to prep for the attack, and then all of a sudden, from the doorway, these bullets started to fly at him in the hallway, and he was the very first person injured in this massacre. The other big development yesterday, after more than a week of examining every aspect of Stephen Paddock's life, they now say there was not one single event that triggered this massacre.
No, he immediately upon being injured notified security of his situation. In close proximity of Mr. Campos being shot, there was also a maintenance worker that presented himself on the 32nd floor, and Mr. Campos prevented him from receiving any injuries.
FBI profilers in the elite behavioral analysis unit have interviewed and re-interviewed all of the closest people to Paddock, including his brother, and they now believe that the motive evolved over time. It was not a single event that triggered it.
In coordination with the FBI's behavioral analysis unit, a comprehensive picture is being drawn as to the suspect's mental state, and currently we do not believe there is one particular event in the suspect's life for us to key on.
As for the victims, we know that 50 are still hospitalized as of late yesterday afternoon, 25 still in critical condition, and Caesars Entertainment has decided to try to help out the victims by raising $2 million from celebrities and celebrity chefs, that $2 million to be distributed to the many victims of this tragedy.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of funds out there to help offset the costs of their health care and so on and so forth for them. Boy, I tell you, this timeline shift really makes you take a closer look. We'll report the news as it happens on it. More to come on this, I'm sure. Dan, thank you very much. President Trump is ready to take matters into his own hands when it comes to health care reform. He tweeted this today. Since Congress can't get its act together on health care, I will be using the power of the pen to give great health care to many people fast. The president did not specify exactly what he plans to do, but on Thursday he's expected to sign an executive order that will reportedly allow small businesses or other groups of people to band together to buy their insurance. Let's bring in Fox News politics editor Chris Steyerwalt. So I want to add this now. Always good to see you, by the way, Chris. So we carried during our first hour of Outnumbered the president there after he had met with Dr. Kissinger, former Secretary of State, and he actually alluded to the executive action that he plans to take. Let's watch that, and then I want to get your response.
I'll also be signing something probably this week, which is going to go a long way to take care of many of the people that have been so badly hurt on health care. And they'll be able to buy, they'll be able to cross state lines, and they will get great competitive health care, and it will cost the United States nothing. Take care of a big percentage of the people we're talking about, too. So with Congress the way it is, I decided to take it upon myself.
Chris, your thoughts?
Well, so what we believe the president is going to do, based on reporting from the Wall Street Journal and others, is that he is going to eliminate some Obamacare regulations that relate to what insurance policies must cover, the kind of care that must be covered under these policies. And in so doing, he will create an incentive in the insurance market, he believes, that will allow companies to offer bare bones plans so that people can, as he said, as you mentioned, band together and go buy these cheaper plans instead of having to stay in the Obamacare exchanges. That's good for those individuals. The concern among insurance administrators are that the sickest people, the oldest people, the people who are most vulnerable, who are left behind and can't go take those bare bones plans, will be stuck with even higher premiums if they can get insurance at all.
Boy, I tell you, it really does speak to the complicated nature of health care when you consider that now a second president is going to use his executive pen to try to change it. I want to remind everybody how many times President Obama did that. It was north of 45, according to our brain room research, where he pushed deadlines and made tweaks. What does it say about Congress when each of these presidents had a bicameral leadership majority, their own party?
Well, this is atrociously, astonishingly complicated. Doing it this way, one of the reasons that the advocates for single-payer central health care have on their side is that they can say, look, it'll just be simple. The federal government's just going to take it over and do it, instead of this Mickey Mouse balloon concept where we're going to squeeze this ear and that ear will get better.
When you see how they run other things.
It may be that, but at least it has the virtue of simplicity. Whereas the market-based folks, the people who are saying, no, we need more market incentives in this, getting from here to there is the hard part. And the real challenge now is we are only a few weeks away from when the new rates come out for next year, and we start to see how insurance companies are responding to all of this uncertainty, this quasi-chaos that's going on around this, because Congress says, well, maybe we're not done yet. Maybe we're going to jump back in and still do something. Who knows?
Well, as you would say, I'll tell you what, because what does this say about those congressional members who, after 7 years, couldn't get it together, and now their party's leader and now our nation's president is going to go it alone and say, look, I'm going to have to do some things on my own without the majority Republicans in Congress. What does it say as they fundraise and get ready to go forth in 2018?
They have to make a decision. Republicans have to make a decision. Are they going to try to, are they going to see what happens on the other side of this? And if Obamacare is now so broken that it can't function, then their hands are forced. What the president's doing, yes, might help these people in the individual market, but it brings us closer to the point where people on all sides have to say, okay, the system doesn't work now. It had problems before. Now it's a total disaster. What are Republicans and Democrats alike going to do? Because there will be no evading blame for Republicans with voters when you get to the end. If people say my premiums went up, my available care went down, things got worse. People don't care about the promises as much as they care about the practical implications for their lives.
All right. One part of the story that I think people may be missing is what happens if the president does nothing. And he has said, you know, very early on, look, we could let it implode. He's not going to do that, though. He's not going to do that because he is the person who can bring about the deal, even if that deal has to be with himself and his pen, apparently.
I don't know. This will hurt Obamacare. This will help those individuals that can go into those markets.
So you got to do something. You can't just let it sit.
Right. And he also, we read that in Iowa, they tried to fix their market in Iowa, and he reportedly told folks at Medicare, Medicaid, don't allow them to fix there. So I think what we may actually be seeing is efforts by the administration to blow it, not just let it implode, but to actively, aggressively work to blow it up.
Take the horse by the reins and then steer it hopefully in a different direction. All right, Chris Direwalt, thank you very much. We are awaiting the White House press briefing right now. Healthcare, tax reform, the NFL anthem controversy, all just some of the topics that may be asked about when Press Secretary Sarah Sanders takes to the lectern. We're expecting that to come in about 30 minutes from now, so we are watching for that. And we also expect to hear more about the meeting that President Trump had today with former Secretary of State Dr. Kissinger. Did he talk about the current situation with Tillerson, his current Secretary of State, and Secretary of Defense Mattis? Together, this comes as big decisions are pending on North Korea and Iran. How much will the Trump administration look to Congress for help? Stay close.
The United States has great strength and patience. But if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. The Iran deal was one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered into.
Fox News Alert now, balancing diplomacy with military might. President Trump is meeting at the White House with Defense Secretary James Mattis and Secretary of State Rex Tillerson amid the rising tensions with North Korea. This a day after Mattis warned the U.S. Army, quote, must stand ready in case diplomacy fails. Meanwhile, the president is reportedly considering a visit to the demilitarized zone during his trip to South Korea next month. Back from Outnumbered, he was our #OneLuckyGuy, Iraq War veteran and Republican Congressman Ron DeSantis of the great state of Florida. Congressman DeSantis chairs the National Security Subcommittee and sits on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Perfect person to have talk about this. So you've got this meeting going on, and while we were together last hour, the president met with former Secretary of State Dr. Henry Kissinger. We don't have everything in place, but you've been in this position long enough to know what some of those conversations might be like?
Well, the North Korea obviously is coming to a head, but don't forget, this is the week he's going to decertify the Iran nuclear agreement, which is one of the biggest things. So they have an awful lot to talk about. I mean, I think at the end of the day with North Korea is how can you change the facts on the ground so that we don't continue going in the direction that we've gone for 25 years, where the Kim regime pursues a nuclear capability that can be delivered to the United States, and I think just as importantly, can be transferred to a rogue state like Iran and sold to them. So that's what they got to figure out. I think that there are obviously military possibilities, there are economic possibilities, there's perhaps some cyber possibilities, but the status quo is not going to work.
Yeah, and one thing that our Ambassador Bolton told me on this very program yesterday was that, well, who would sign up for year 26 of the bad idea regime since it hasn't worked? So you talk about those facts on the ground. Can you give me a couple that we need to immediately change?
Well, I would say, and they have gone in this direction, but whatever you can do to choke off money going to the Kim regime, particularly through China, the more and more you do that, the more difficult it is for Kim Jong-un to operate. It doesn't mean he's going to turn over and give up his nuclear program, but I think the more problems he faces domestically, the more instability we can create would be good for us. Ultimately, if we could have a different regime there, then that would make things much easier. And
that's interesting. Okay, now you're talking about regime change, which this country and its military have done in the past in other places. Are we ready for that?
Well, it's not necessarily doing it through our military. I mean, if you can weaken him, if he's hurting for cash, you can create problems
like
on the ground.
Like a coup within his own country?
That can then be exploited, perhaps. I mean, if the government collapsed on its own weight, look, it's a dysfunctional system. They're running it like a prison. It isn't like he's got a lot of popular consent behind him on this
Can
thing.
I just throw this out, though? You know, he's the younger of the two who have had the mantle, if you will, as dictators in North Korea that share the name Kim Jong. His father had it too, ill. Now we've got Un. Are we confident that even if we were to help this regime be knocked down, that the next thing that pops up like a mushroom out of the ground is something that's going to be better?
In this case, I don't think you could do any worse. I mean, I think there's always that fear, just generally speaking, but I think this is a brutal regime where the people are basically enslaved and have been for decade after decade. So I think anything that would happen would be an improvement. But I mean, if you had a reunified peninsula under democratic rule, all of a sudden this major issue would go away.
Decertification of Iran and the talks that he's having right now with his secretaries of state and defense. Where do you think this president is? What are we going to hear on Thursday?
I think he will decertify it, because in order to certify it, he has to certify two things. One, that Iran's in compliance, which I think is hard to do because they've exceeded heavy water stocks, they've exceeded the number of advanced centrifuges, but you also have to...
In its nuclear program, not to mention the missiles that they've been firing.
Exactly. But you also have to certify that it's in the vital national security interests of the United States. And he said it's one of the worst deals ever. I don't think it's in the vital national security interests of the United States. I think it's undermining our interests. So I don't think he can do the certification again. But the question is then what do we do next to try to put Iran back in the box?
I love having you here because I can ask you questions that I know in the Foreign Affairs Committee and others on the Hill have to be talked about. And that is with regard to those side deals. Do you feel like you got the whole story?
Never. We never got the side deals. You remember the Corker-Cardin. It required the Obama administration to produce all side deals.
And what happened? Did they burn it? Did they lose it? Did it fly out the window?
We never received the IAEA side deals with Iran about the previous military dimensions and about other aspects of their nuclear capability. Those are some of the most important pieces of information you need to even be able to evaluate the deal. So, no, this thing has been a disaster from the start.
All right. So the talk about, oh, the president is going to pull out of this deal, that's not accurate, correct? But what is he going to do in terms of how it will look different, how it will feel different to those of us in America?
It's a great point. The decertification is about U.S. domestic law, the Corker-Cardin bill. It is not the same thing as the JCPOA, which is effectively the Iran deal. Now, decertifying puts us on the road to get out of the Iran deal. But remember, Harris, it was never ratified as a treaty. The Iran deal is not binding U.S. law. The president could simply stop abiding by it tomorrow. So the question is once you decertify, which I think you have to do, what sanctions regime, what other countries can we bring to bear, what other pressure can we bring to bear on Iran? But we're going to have to do something. You remember the warm reception he got from the Gulf states. The reason why they did that is because they see Donald Trump as somebody who understands the threat posed by Iran. So it's not just people in the Congress that want to see more action. You have a lot of people around the world who are worried about the Iranian nuclear threat.
So you talk about the Corker-Cardin bill, and you consider the president's tweets right now with Bob Corker. And the only thing that he gave us, according to one of the president's tweets, was the Iran deal. And then you talk about putting this in the hands of Congress. Where should the American people feel their confidence should lie if this goes back to the body that spit this out?
Well, part of the reason the Iran deal was so disastrous because you had a President Obama who was pushing for it. I think if President Trump pushed for tougher sanctions on Iran, I think the Republicans would rally around that. But you know what? I think you'd see some Democrats who voted for the Iran deal who now have buyer's remorse because we've seen Iran's belligerence.
You don't have to name
increase.
Anybody, but have you talked to anybody?
We actually, I've spoken
you can
with
name
some
them
people.
if you want to.
I've spoken to some people. Just the Iran deal, remember, Obama lobbied that as hard as anything he did as president, including Obamacare. So now you don't have him there. So I think you may see some say, look, we got to try something else.
Real quickly, without a brand new authorization for war or whatever it would take, could we see this president in any sort of executive action address this issue without Congress?
There are things he can do without Congress as commander-in-chief, for sure. But I think ultimately, if you want to have a real significant sanction regime, that would have to be approved by the Congress. And we should do that.
It's something that's measurable, you're saying.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Representative DeSantis, thank you very much. We appreciate your time
Congrats
on both
on the
hours
show
today.
again. You're doing
thank
a great
you
job.
very much. Appreciate it. All right, we are awaiting the daily White House press briefing set to start in a matter of moments. And one topic they could touch on is tax reform. That's something that affects everybody. Boy, wouldn't it be nice to do your taxes on a postcard? Ahead, President Trump's trip to Pennsylvania is set for tomorrow, where he will push again for the GOP's tax plan. A former economic advisor to President Reagan joins us now next to give us a take on that proposal. He likes it. He's going to tell us why after his boss signed the Tax Reform Act of 1986 into law.
By lowering everyone's tax rates all the way up the income scale, each of us will have a greater incentive to climb higher, to excel, to help America grow.
All right, we are now within a 15-minute window or so of the White House press briefing set to start at any moment. You see the media pulling into place there. This is the most activity that we've seen in the last couple of minutes. They are set to go about quarter to the top of the hour. So as this happens and Press Secretary Sarah Sanders steps to the lectern, we will take you there live. A couple of things, as you know, from our conversations both just moments ago with Congressman DeSantis of Florida, Iran, North Korea, these bigger issues that are coming up and coming to a head this week with a deadline for this president on decertification of the Iran deal. That was such a legacy point for the last president that many people had said, both parties, we still don't know all of what's in it. We still don't know how committed we are and whether or not we need to go forward with it. And of course, his tweets early today on health care. You've got people getting ready for their new enrollment period in November for Obamacare, and parts of it simply falling away and prices skyrocketing for premiums, and this president getting ready to take executive action with his pen and talking about that earlier after he met with Dr. Kissinger at the White House. All of this in the last 90 minutes or so as we gear up to a live press briefing from the White House. We'll take you there live when it happens. Well, President Trump is headed to Pennsylvania for tomorrow to make his case for the Republican Party's tax reform plan. It calls for lower rates for businesses, fewer income tax rates for individuals, and a much larger standard deduction in child tax credit. The president giving us a preview just about 45 minutes ago. Watch this.
We're the highest tax nation in the world. People want to see massive tax cuts. I'm giving the largest tax cuts in the history of this country. In addition to that, there'll be reform. So I think that it's politically, it's very positive. The people of the country want it. We're also bringing back $3 trillion from offshore. That's money that's been there for years that wants to come back into the country, but the tax situation didn't allow it to happen, and the bureaucracy.
An opportunity now to go deep on this issue. Arthur Laffer is the founder and chairman of Laffer Associates. He's also an economic advisor to President Ronald Reagan. So you know a bit about getting tax legislation passed and seeing how it wears on the American people and getting that response back. Great to have you, Art. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Harris. Congratulations on the show, by the way.
Thank you very much. I'm super excited and also thrilled to be able to talk about these big issues with people like yourself. Let's talk about actually what could happen here. And it's being called, this legislation, one of the hinge points in history for tax legislation. This is such a huge deal. Why is that?
Well, basically, the corporate tax rate today is the highest in the OECD. In 2000, it was the 7th highest. Everyone else has cut their corporate taxes dramatically in the world, and we haven't. This bill cuts it. I mean, it takes it down from 35% to 20%. I wish they'd gone to 15%, but that is a huge stimulus to the economy, and I think will be an adrenaline that will cause this economy to grow like mad, and that is the key element that I think is really important in this tax bill.
Can you give me a couple of areas where the American people will feel this in a positive way immediately?
Yeah, jobs, output, employment, and growth, and higher real wages for employees. That's where the effects will be. What they've also done is allowed expensing of capital purchases, which increases the return on capital, so will cause a lot of capital spending, which has been very short for many, many years. What they've also done is they've also gotten rid of the estate tax, which is a killer. It's one of the most immoral taxes in the codes, and they've gone from 7 brackets, I believe, down to 3 brackets, which is a significant simplification of the tax code. So all of these coming together are really very, very positive and very pro-growth items, and should lead to a continued, if not an accelerated, recovery for the U.S.
Would you compare this or say if it's even bolder than what you tried to do with President Reagan all those years ago in 1986, getting legislation going forward? That was considered huge then. How would you compare this journey?
Yeah, I would say this is better than Reagan's 81 bill. I think the 81 bill was great for President Ronald Reagan, and this one I think is as good, if not a little bit better than that. The 86 Tax Act was amazing. We cut the highest marginal income tax rate down to 28% from 50%. We cut the corporate rate from 46 to 34%. We went from 14 tax brackets to 2 tax brackets. It was an amazing expansion for the U.S. economy. This bill isn't quite that large, but it's in the right direction, and it will have a similar type of effect on the U.S. economy. Amazing growth should follow, and that will have political consequences as well as economic consequences.
Interesting. How so politically, do you think? I mean, do Democrats want to consider jumping on board to the warm ship with the free drinks, if you will?
They oppose this at their own risk, to be very honest with you. Now, in 1981, President Reagan phased in the tax cuts, which meant that the effects were phased in and didn't really start until January 1st, 83. In the 82 election, the Republicans lost seats in the House and the Senate, and it was a very bad election for Republicans. By the time that tax bill hit, Harris, we had the biggest expansion from January 1st, 1983 to June 30th, 1984, the economy of the U.S. grew by a full 12% in real terms.
Huge.
That's at an 8% annual rate, and we won the 84 election. We only won 49 out of 50 states, so it was a real squeaker, but we made it by just joking. But we won the huge election, and then every Democrat joined us.
Real quickly, I'm going to ask my team to play the beginning of Vice President Pence last night in Sacramento, California, talking about getting your taxes on a sheet of paper. We may cut out short of that, but I want you to at least hear the top. Let's roll.
Sure.
Right. So we're going to simplify the tax code. We're going to go from 7 marginal rates down to 3. We're going to lower taxes on working families, small businesses, ranchers, and family farms. In fact, after this tax reform legislation is signed into law, 90% of the American people will be able to fill out your taxes on one sheet of paper.
Art, is that possible?
It's possible. It surely is possible. And I love it that he says that. Now, we haven't seen the legislation yet and how it works through the committees and what happens, but there's no reason why we couldn't have a tax code just the way the vice president described it. There's just no reason we need complicated, arcane tax codes. I wish he'd said for 100% of the people instead of just 90, but
well,
hey, 90's better than 80.
When you look at how long it takes to figure some of just the instructions out, I mean, come on, anything north of 30% might be better than nothing. I will say this, though, as the vice president speaking about that, he's hitting on an issue that doesn't have politics. Like, who doesn't want to do their taxes on a postcard, size piece of paper, whatever it would be, just not so many? I mean, that really saves Americans a lot of money. But you know what the other does? When you have it so complicated, you keep people in government employed because you got those people at the IRS. You got to,
and you have tax returns, accountants, lobbyists, favor grabbers, all that stuff. The other thing that he said in that little quip, by the way, Harris, that was really important, he said 3 tax brackets. Now, remember, the president has said there's a possibility of a 4th. In that speech, Pence said explicitly only 3 brackets, which would be wonderful, not to try to raise the highest rate and pander to those people who think that by taxing the rich you can make the poor better off, which is nonsense. I mean, you can't love jobs and hate job creators. You just can't do it.
Wow. Drop the mic on that. Art Laffer, thank you for joining us today.
Again, congratulations, Harris.
Thank you so much. A big talk ahead with the President of the United States going to take on tax reform this week. We'll bring you that when it happens. New details in the escalating scandal now surrounding Harvey Weinstein. Ahead, the chilling police audio now of that disgraced Hollywood mogul. It seems to show him admitting to groping a model. And top Democrats like Nancy Pelosi not ruling out a government shutdown if they can't reach a deal with President Trump on protections for dreamers. Which party takes the political fallout, though, if it actually comes to that? Power panel about to weigh in. Stay close. Let's take a shot now of the White House press briefing room. You see the lectern there in the center where Press Secretary Sarah Sanders will stand up to answer questions. We anticipate that that will happen on time, but we don't know. It's just a couple minutes away here. When it happens, we'll take you there live. Just wanted to give you a shot there to let you know that reporters are pulling into place as they often do a couple minutes before. So that's always an indication that it's coming. All right, let's move on. This story is growing out of control. The scandal surrounding former movie mogul Harvey Weinstein, with new tidbits of information. Chief correspondent Jonathan Hunt is following this for us in Los Angeles. And Jonathan, a big thing right now has to do with a piece of audio that has come out. What is it?
Yeah, and the allegations keep coming minute by minute, Harris, with the New York Times now reporting actresses Gwyneth Paltrow and Angelina Jolie claim Harvey Weinstein sexually harassed them. Meantime, that audio recording you just mentioned is apparently from a police sting operation in New York in 2015. In the recording, a then 22-year-old Italian actress is heard refusing Weinstein's pleas to enter his hotel room and accusing him of groping her. Listen here.
I'm feeling very uncomfortable right now.
Please come in now, and 1 minute. And if you want to leave, when the guy comes with my jacket, you can go.
Yesterday you touched my breast.
Oh, please, I'm sorry. Just come on. I'm used to that. Come on.
Are you used to that?
Yes, come in.
Now, although that tape was part of a police operation, the Manhattan DA's office ultimately declined to pursue charges in the case. We're also hearing more today about Harvey Weinstein's attempts to save his career over the weekend. He apparently sent an email just before the Weinstein Company fired him, asking those with whom he'd worked over 3 decades to write to the company's board, objecting to his firing. In the letter, he says, quote, "Do not let me be fired. If the industry supports me, that is all I need." But more and more celebrities are now expressing horror at the allegations against Weinstein. Nicole Kidman just issuing a statement saying, quote, "As I've stated before publicly, I support and applaud all women and these women who speak out against any abuse and misuse of power, be it domestic violence or sexual harassment in the workforce. We need to eradicate this behavior." And Harris, we have just in the last couple of minutes received a statement from former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who has over the years been close to Mr. Weinstein. In that statement, she says, quote, "I was shocked and appalled by the revelations about Harvey Weinstein. The behavior described by women coming forward cannot be tolerated. Their courage and the support of others is critical in helping to stop this kind of behavior. Harvey Weinstein Harris rapidly running out of friends.
Yeah,
Harris?
and word that his own brother, that the members of the board that voted him out of his company that bears his name, all of that coming to light about Weinstein. Jonathan Hunt, thank you very much. Democrats are signaling they are ready to play hardball on immigration. Party leaders such as Nancy Pelosi are keeping the door open to a government shutdown after the Trump administration came out with a wish list that would accompany any deal on Dreamers. It includes calls for a border wall and cracking down on sanctuary cities. Pelosi called the proposed measures a, quote, non-starter. The House Democratic leader goes on to tell the Washington Post, quote, this: I fully intend to use every possibility, but we're not at that place yet. Right now, we're trying to get Republicans to vote on what we believe, end quote. Let's bring in our power panel now. Kristen Solstice Anderson is a Republican pollster and columnist for the Washington Examiner. Welcome. And back from the Outnumbered couch today, Jessica Tarlov, Democratic strategist and Fox News contributor. Welcome to you both. All right. I want to talk with you first about this, Jessica, because, and by the way, when you talk about Nancy Pelosi saying that she hasn't gotten to the point of the end yet, how do you defend a sanctuary city?
I think that you defend a sanctuary city by going back to what the original intention was to create an environment in which illegal aliens could come out of the shadows and work with law enforcement to get the bad guys. Sanctuary cities has turned into another thing altogether. We know that after Kate Steinle's murder in San Francisco, there was huge publicity for the issue, and that a number of people who were supportive of them have now turned on them. I think it is getting harder and harder to make that a centerpiece of Democrat immigration policy, but at the same time, when you hear the police chiefs all across the nation speaking out in favor of these cities because of the work that they can do because of it, yeah, but they,
all right.
But
so
it's not
Kristen,
just one.
When you hear Jessica say, well, it's harder and harder to defend them. I mean, I'm just looking at some of the crimes that have played out. You mentioned the Steinle family. Your thoughts?
Well, border security is something that's overwhelmingly popular. And what is so surprising to me is that Nancy Pelosi, leading the House Democrats, is in perhaps the weakest position of anyone in Washington to be saying, well, there's this one policy that we all want, DACA, which is fairly popular. Right. And even President Trump has said he's very open to it. But if you're going to get that one popular thing, you can't also do this other popular thing, which is border security. Now, Democrats in the Senate, because of the way they have the 60-vote rule, they may have a little more negotiating room. But for Nancy Pelosi, who controls a small minority of folks in the House of Representatives, to threaten something like a government shutdown over what are very popular policies just seems like a big political
miscalculation. But the wall is also in there, which is obviously different than the sanctuary city policy. I mean, there's more in there. He basically gave his original wish list.
Right, but let's talk about some of the things that are in it where people are kind of in agreement. I mean, when you talk about, and you talk about a wall, and that's a structure in some places where it can be, not every place can be. So the president has talked about shoring up border security with ICE agents. I don't think anybody's arguing against.
No, the Gang of Eight bill actually asked for more agents than
right. So that's a place of bipartisanship, I think, that you could reach. Another area is talking about people coming into the country, with children in tow. And what do we do with those unaccompanied minors and those sorts of things? I don't necessarily see those as points that wouldn't get talked about.
Well, yeah, I think when you take a look at something like DACA, the reason why this has great bipartisan support is because we're not talking about folks that came to the United States yesterday, and we're not talking about folks that made a conscious choice to come and break a law. We're talking about kids who were brought here by their parents, and that's why even those who are pretty strong on border security tend to be favorable to DACA. But to say you're going to hold this policy hostage because you also don't like other things like border security measures that are overwhelmingly popular when your party's
when
not
it may
in power.
signal that you just don't want to get a deal done, period. All right, we'll be right back. Stay close.